In 1868, a one-eyed stagecoach driver named Charley Parkhurst walked into a polling place in Sacramento, California, registered to vote, and cast a ballot in the presidential election between Ulysses S. Grant and Horatio Seymour. 52 years before women got the right to vote, nobody questioned it, nobody suspected. Charley had been driving stagecoaches through Gold Rush, California for nearly 2 decades, one of the best whips in the state. Tough, skilled, fearless. The kind of driver who could handle a 6-horse team at full gallop down mountain roads so narrow that one wrong move meant death. Charley chewed tobacco, drank whiskey, cursed fluently, wore an eye patch after getting kicked by a horse, shot and killed at least one bandit, and lived alone with the horses, avoiding close friendships, keeping secrets. When Charley died in a remote cabin near Watsonville on December 28, 1879, neighbors preparing the body for burial made a discovery that would shock California and become a national sensation. Charley Parkhurst had been born Charlotte Darkey Parkhurst. For more than 30 years, one of California's most respected stagecoach drivers had been a woman living as a man, and nobody knew. This is that story. Charlotte Darkey Parkhurst was born in 1812 in Lebanon, New Hampshire, or possibly Sharon, Vermont. The records are unclear. What is clear is that Charlotte's mother died the year of her birth, and after an older brother died in 1813, Charlotte and her sister Maria ended up in an orphanage. Life in a 19th century orphanage was grim. Charlotte was unloved, surrounded by poverty, controlled by rigid institutional rules. When she was about 12 years old, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She dressed in boys' clothing and ran away. The disguise worked, and Charlotte quickly discovered something that would shape her future. Boys had opportunities that girls didn't. Boys could apprentice in trades, boys could work in stables, boys could learn skills that led to real careers. Girls had almost no options. So Charlotte became Charley, and Charley never looked back. Charley found work at a livery stable in Worcester, Massachusetts, owned by a man named Ebenezer Balch. The work was hard, cleaning stalls, washing carriages, scrubbing floors. But Charley earned room and board. More importantly, Charley learned about horses. Balch recognized something in his young stable hand. He saw skill, dedication, a natural aptitude with the animals he taught Charley to ride. Then, to drive a wagon with 2 horses. Then 4. Eventually, 6 horses, the most difficult and prestigious skill a driver could master. When Balch bought the Franklin House and the What Cheer stables in Providence, Rhode Island, Charley went with him. These were large operations, stables that could hold more than 100 horses and employed veterinary surgeons, blacksmiths, wheelwrights, and experienced drivers. Charley worked for Balch for several years, steadily building a reputation. The other drivers may have noticed that Charley was different, preferred sleeping in the stables with the horses rather than socializing, rarely talked about personal matters, kept to himself, but they accepted him. In a profession where skill mattered above all else, Charley delivered. By the late 1840s, Charley Parkhurst was known as one of the best stagecoach drivers on the East Coast. Clients specifically requested him. His reputation was established. And then came news from California. Gold had been discovered in 1848. Thousands of people were flooding west. Among them were 2 of Charley's former co-workers, James Birch and Frank Stevens, who had founded the California Stage Company. California needed stagecoach drivers, desperately. The only way to reach the gold fields from San Francisco or Sacramento was by foot or horseback. The most efficient method, stagecoach. Around 1851, Charley boarded the steamer R.B. Forbes in Boston, bound for Panama. The ship sailed to the Isthmus of Panama, where passengers crossed overland, a difficult disease-ridden journey through jungle, and then boarded another ship on the Pacific side, bound for San Francisco. On board the Forbes, Charley met a San Francisco businessman named John Morton, who ran a drayage company. Morton later described Charley as an agreeable companion. They talked about California's opportunities. Morton offered Charley a job when they arrived. California in 1851 was chaos. The gold rush had transformed sleepy Mexican settlements into booming towns practically overnight. Fortunes were being made and lost, daily infrastructure was almost non-existent. The demand for transportation was enormous. Charley went to work for the California Stage Company, joining former co-workers from Rhode Island. The job was dangerous, demanding, and paid well, sometimes as much as $125 a month plus room and board. That was exceptional money for the 1850s, when a cowboy might earn $25 to $40 a month, but there was a reason for the high pay. Stagecoach driving in Gold Rush, California, was one of the most dangerous jobs in the West. The roads, if you could call them roads, were little more than dirt tracks carved into mountainsides. They were narrow, rutted, muddy in winter, dusty in summer, and treacherous year-round. Drivers guided 6-horse teams pulling coaches that could weigh over a ton when fully loaded with passengers and freight. The coaches carried gold and silver bullion, mining company payrolls, mail, and passengers willing to pay premium prices for speed. One misstep could send horses, coach, and passengers plunging hundreds of feet down a mountain. Spring storms could wash out roads entirely. Bandits hid behind rocks and trees, waiting for vulnerable targets. And the horses themselves, spirited, barely trained animals, could bolt at any moment. Charley handled it all. Charley drove routes throughout Northern California, Sacramento to Placerville through the mother-lode country, Stockton to Mariposa where gold fever still burned hot, Oakland to San Jose along what was called the Great Stage Route, and San Juan Bautista to Santa Cruz over the treacherous coastal mountains. The mountain routes were where reputations were made or broken. The road from San Jose to Santa Cruz climbed steep grades to a summit, then plunged down narrow tracks carved into hillsides, where one miscalculation meant death for everyone aboard. Roads wound through passes with sheer drops on one side, sometimes hundreds of feet straight down, and rock faces on the other. Turns were so sharp that the led horses' heads would almost look into the windows of the coach as the team navigated the curves. On some routes, like the Pioneer Stage Line between Placerville and Virginia City, Nevada, drivers pushed their teams over the Sierra Nevada through terrain so rugged that passengers would close their eyes in terror. The beautiful alpine scenery passed by in a dizzying blur. Sheer granite cliffs towered above, while canyons yawned into dark depths far below. Winter made everything worse. Converted sleighs hauled mail, and the few passengers willing to endure the frigid ride through snow-choked passes. Spring brought mud that could swallow wagon wheels to the hubs. Summer dust choked drivers and passengers alike, coating everything in a fine powder that got into eyes, lungs, clothing. The coaches themselves were marvels of engineering. The famous Concord coaches built in New Hampshire with their distinctive leather thoroughbrace suspension that created a rocking motion instead of bone-jarring jolts. They could carry up to 20 passengers, 9 inside, more on top. The coaches weighed over a ton fully loaded, add 6 horses, and a driver was controlling several tons of weight, wood, leather, and terrified humanity at speeds that could reach 15 miles per hour on good roads. Contemporary observers were awed by the skill required. British writer J.G. Player Froude, who traveled California by stagecoach in 1872, wrote, "Western stage drivers would go down mountain roads full gallop, and unless anything broke, would take you safely a long way up the opposite slope without hardly slackening their speed. The only way to go down those mountain grades is to rush it. The turns in the road are so sharp and the incline so steep that to venture timidly is to risk upsetting the coach." That philosophy, rush it or die, required absolute confidence. Hesitation meant losing control. The slightest uncertainty could cause horses to balk, the coach to tip, disaster to unfold in seconds. Charley earned the nickname 6-Horse Charley for his expertise in handling the most difficult teams. Other drivers ranked him alongside Hank Monk, Clark Foss, and George Gordon, the best whips in California. Passengers considered it an honor to sit in the driver's seat beside Charley Parkhurst. His skill with the whip was legendary. From 20 feet away, Charley could flick a fly off a horse without touching the animal. He could slice open the end of an envelope or cut a cigar out of a man's mouth. The whip was an extension of his arm, precisely controlled, never cruel. When passengers asked how Charley could see the road through the dust, he replied, "Smell it. Fact is, I've traveled over these mountains so often, I can tell where the road is by the sound of the wheels. When they rattle, I'm on hard ground. When they don't rattle, I generally look over the side to see where she's going." But Charley's toughest reputation came from something else entirely. Around 1856, a horse kicked Charley in the head, permanently destroying the vision in his left eye. After that, Charley wore a leather eye patch. The injury would have ended most drivers' careers. Depth perception is crucial when guiding 6 horses down narrow mountain roads. Charley kept driving. The eye patch made him even more distinctive. One-eyed Charley became another nickname. Between that and the constant chewing of tobacco, the whiskey drinking, the cursing, and the solitary habits, Charley fit perfectly into the rough culture of Gold Rush, California. Then came the bandits. During the 1850s, stagecoach robbery was epidemic in California. Highwaymen would hide behind rocks or lie flat on the ground near blind curves. When the stage approached, they'd jump up with shotguns leveled at the driver. "Throw down the gold box." Most drivers complied. Passenger safety came first, and the Wells Fargo strongbox was insured. It wasn't worth dying over. Charley had a different philosophy. In 1858, a notorious bandit nicknamed Sugarfoot held up Charley's stage on the road from Stockton to Mariposa. According to some accounts, Sugarfoot made off with $100,000 in gold dust. Charley handed over the strongbox, but vowed revenge. 6 months later, Sugarfoot tried again. He and his gang jumped out and seized the horses' bridles. Charley cracked the whip. The horses bolted. While the team thundered forward, Charley turned around, drew his revolver, and fired at the bandits. Sugarfoot crawled into a miner's cabin and died from a bullet wound to the stomach. Wells Fargo, grateful for Charley's courage, presented him with a large watch and chain made of solid gold. Charley wore it proudly for the rest of his life. Another time, a highway robber ordered Charley to raise his hands while the team was struggling through mud holes in a creek bed near Grass Valley. Charley cracked his whip across the robber's eyes, temporarily blinding him, and drove away. The story spread. Charley Parkhurst wasn't someone to mess with. But violence wasn't the only danger. Accidents were constant. One afternoon, driving down from Carson Pass, Charley's lead horses veered off the road. The coach lurched violently. Charley was thrown from the driver's box but managed to hold onto the reins. The horses dragged him along on his stomach over rough ground while terrified passengers screamed inside the coach. Somehow, Charley steered the panicked horses back onto the road. Every passenger survived. Charley suffered broken ribs but was back on the box within weeks. For 15 years, Charley Parkhurst drove stagecoaches through California. He hauled gold, transported prisoners to San Quentin, carried mail, and moved passengers safely across some of the most dangerous terrain in the West. His name appeared on passenger lists, in newspaper articles, in company records. He registered to vote in 1867, a routine administrative action that nobody questioned. Journalist J. Ross Brown rode with Charley from Placerville to Virginia City, and later illustrated the journey for Harper's Magazine in 1865. The drawing shows Charley on the driver's box, handling the reins with practiced ease, one eye hidden beneath the distinctive leather patch. In 1880, the New York Times would write, "He was in his day one of the most dexterous and celebrated of the famous California drivers. It was an honor to sit in the spare end of the driver's seat when the fearless Charley Parkhurst held the reins of a 4 or 6 in hand." By the late 1860s, the golden age of stagecoaching was ending. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. Rail lines began spreading throughout California. Stagecoach companies lost mail contracts, routes shut down, demand collapsed. The work had taken its toll. 15 years of 18-hour days, bouncing on a hard wooden box seat, exposed to every weather extreme California could produce. Charley's hands bore scars from rope burns and rains. The broken ribs from the Carson Pass accident had never quite healed right, and the constant vigilance, maintaining the disguise every single day, must have been exhausting. Charley once told a journalist, "I'm no better now than when I commenced. Pay's small and work's heavy. I'm getting old. Rheumatism in my bones. Nobody to look out for old used-up stage drivers. I'll kick the bucket one of these days, and that'll be the last of old Charley." The rheumatism was real. Years of exposure to cold, wet conditions had inflamed joints and stiffened limbs. Many stage drivers suffered the same fate. The difference was that Charley couldn't seek proper medical care without risking discovery. In 1865, Charley opened a stage station and saloon between Santa Cruz and Watsonville, a rest stop where coaches could change horses and passengers could get a meal. It was steady work, less dangerous than driving. But even this required constant vigilance. Running a public business meant daily interactions with customers, suppliers, other business owners. Every conversation carried the risk of exposure. Eventually, Charley sold the business and leased a tract of land on the Soquel Augmentation Ranch for $30 per year. He tried ranching, raising cattle, and working as a lumberjack, anything to make ends meet with a body that was wearing out. For 15 years after retiring from the box, Charley worked at farming and lumbering in the winter, occasionally hauling freight for neighbors, always solitary, always keeping others at a distance, always maintaining the secret that had defined 3 decades of life. By his 60s, Charley's health was failing. Severe rheumatism shriveled his limbs. Then came cancer of the tongue, likely caused by decades of chewing tobacco. The pain must have been excruciating. Charley moved to a small 2-room cabin in the woods near Watsonville. He lived there alone, raising chickens, barely interacting with neighbors. Several times during his final illness, Charley called a friend to his bedside, seeming to want to say something important, but he never did. On December 18, 1879, Charley Parkhurst died at age 67. Neighbors came to prepare the body for burial. It was a routine task in frontier California, washing the body, dressing it for the coffin, making arrangements. That's when they discovered the truth. The Sacramento Daily Bee published Charley's obituary a few days later. On Sunday last, there died a person known as Charley Parkhurst, aged 67, who was well known to old residents as a stage driver. He was in early days accounted one of the most expert manipulators of the reins who ever sat on the box of a coach. It was discovered when friendly hands were preparing him for his final rest that Charley Parkhurst was unmistakably a well-developed woman. The revelation became a national sensation. Newspapers across the country picked up the story. How had nobody known? How had Charley kept the secret for 3 decades? The doctor who examined the body made an additional discovery. Charley had given birth at least once. A small red trunk in the cabin contained baby clothes, all that remained of a child who had died young or been given away. Once the secret was revealed, people claimed they had always suspected. Charley's hands were small and smooth, even though he always wore leather gloves. His voice was oddly high-pitched. He never had a girlfriend. He slept in the stables rather than socializing. But these were observations made in hindsight. For 30 years, nobody had questioned Charley's identity. In a world where men came west to reinvent themselves, where everyone had secrets, where skill mattered more than background, Charley Parkhurst fit right in. The question that haunted people then, and still does now, was why? Why did Charlotte Parkhurst choose to live as a man? The answer seems obvious when you look at the options available to women in the 1850s. A woman couldn't own property in many states, couldn't vote, couldn't work most jobs, couldn't travel freely, couldn't live independently. A woman's choices were limited to marriage, domestic service, or prostitution, and even those options were controlled by men. As a man, Charley could do all of it: drive stagecoaches for high pay, own land, vote, live alone, control his own life and money. The freedom was extraordinary by comparison. Some modern historians suggest Charley might have been transgender, someone who genuinely identified as male rather than simply adopting a male persona for practical reasons. We'll never know for certain. Charley left no diary, no confession, no explanation. What we do know is this: Charley Parkhurst lived the life he wanted. He worked a demanding, dangerous job and excelled at it. He earned respect through skill, not deception. He saved money, several $1,000s by the time of his death, a substantial sum. He voted, he owned land, he made his own choices. In 1955, the Pajaro Valley Historical Association erected a monument at Charley's grave in Watsonville's Pioneer Cemetery. The inscription reads, "Noted whip of the gold rush days, drove stage over Mount Madonna in early days of Valley. Last run San Juan to Santa Cruz. Death in cabin near the 7-mile house revealed one-eyed Charley, a woman. The first woman to vote in the U.S., November 3, 1868. That last claim is debatable. It's unclear whether Charley actually cast a ballot in 1868 or simply registered. Other women may have voted earlier in local elections in Western territories, but the symbolic power of the story remains. 52 years before the 19th Amendment, a stagecoach driver in California exercised a right that wouldn't be legally granted to women until 1920. Today, Charley Parkhurst's story appears in history textbooks as part of California's LGBTQ+ history curriculum. The Parkhurst Terrace apartments in Santa Cruz County are named in his honor. The story has been told in children's books, historical novels, and a 1958 episode of the television series Death Valley Days. Whether the driver was male or female, that didn't matter at all. For 30 years, Charley Parkhurst lived that truth. The one-eyed whip who fooled California wasn't really fooling anyone. He was simply doing the job better than most men who tried it. And in the end, that's all that mattered.